Hello, everybody, and welcome to Heartlight Vedic Astrology. In today's talk, I was going to discuss the full moon or Purnima that's happening February 1st, 2026. This talk is from Vedic Astrology or Jyotish perspective, so ancient Indian astrology that's more than 5,000 years old. And it seems like the theme for this moment in time is rewriting your story. So let's take a look. Note beforehand, the information presented here is for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical, financial, professional, or life advice of any kind. If you are in need, please contact an appropriate professional for support. Then you might take a minute or two to read the rest of this disclaimer. Okay, so just a few announcements and orientation, especially for those of you who are new to the channel. Auto dubbing is available on this channel in various languages listed here. The newest ones are Dutch, Polish, and Korean. Also, the big astrological news is that eclipses are coming. So that's in Vedic astrology, that's always about expect the unexpected. And I have a bunch of eclipse-related videos you can check out so that you can work with that energy in the best way possible. So, like I have a symbolism of Rahu Ketu, the nodes of the moon, symbolism of sun, and symbolism of moon videos. Those 4 planets are what you need to line up to get an eclipse. Then I have specifically a lunar solar eclipse or grahas video, and then auspicious timing or muhurta eclipses, and then mantras for Rahu Ketu eclipses and mantras for the sun or Surya. So especially if you have or want to create a mantra practice for the eclipse, you can check those out. So all of my teaching videos on the subject of Vedic astrology are my concepts playlist. They can be found there. Wherever you see a double asterisk in one of my talks, that means there's a teaching video on that subject if you'd like to learn more. My channel is all about playlists so that videos are easy to find. So this type of moon phase video is in my Go Chart Planetary Transits playlist, but there are other playlists as well. If you like to learn astrology by checking out the birth charts of famous people, places, or moments in time, check out my birth chart archive list 2025 video, where I list almost all the famous charts I've analyzed on the channel and the videos you can find them in. So some of the newest videos I posted, in case you missed any: National Birth Chart of Australia, Planetary Transits or Go Chart for January 2026, and then birth charts for Jeff Bezos and Amazon, and then Rohini Nakshatra or Lunar Mansion, the favorite star. So if you want to start learning Vedic astrology or get more out of talks like this, I've listed some videos at the end of the slide that you can check out if you really want to get a solid foundation for that. Okay, so here's a look at the chart that we're going to be examining today. Again, this is a full moon or Purnima happening on February 1st, 2026. This chart is set for 17:09 p.m. Eastern Standard Time or New York time. That's the time zone I live in. And so, again, this is a blank chart, without my notes and markings, so you can kind of look at it yourself and see what you get out of it before I start going through. But let's start going through. So, there's a lot going on in this chart. Well, that's true for almost every chart, but you can see there's a lot that's really quite intense in this chart. So, let's start at the top here. The top diamond in the middle, that's called the ascendant first house rising sign. In Sanskrit, it's known as the lugna. And that rising sign, or lugna, is important because it sets the tone for the whole chart. Okay. Kind of orients you to the rest of the chart. So we can see in the lugna here that we have a moon, and moon is in its own sign of Cancer. Okay, so that little 4 in the bottom corner, that refers to the 4th zodiac constellation, or Cancer, which is ruled or owned by moon. In Sanskrit, we would say Karka for that constellation. Okay. To get to the other houses, you count inclusively from the first house and then counterclockwise or up and to the left. So if you go to the upper left corner, that upside down triangle with K2 in it, and the 5 in the bottom corner, that's the second house. And the 5 refers to the constellation of Leo, the 5th constellation. Okay. So, going back to the lugna here, so we have what we call swa, meaning moon is in its own sign, and that gives moon strength. And we have a full moon here, that also gives it strength. So we have a very strong moon here. And what does moon represent? Moon represents things like the emotional mind, the intuitive mind, nurturing, imagination, that sort of thing. The public as well, mothering, food, nurturance, fluids, those sorts of things. And this moon is not only swan full, but it's also bhavam, meaning that the first lord has gone to the first house. So what that means is that, the first house is all about the self, both the physical self and the emotional self and the personality, that sort of thing. So when the first lord has gone to the first house, there's usually this notion of like self-development, of always like kind of going back and repeating and building up the self. Okay. Now the moon is in a nakshatra or lunar mansion called Aslesha. Okay, if you're not familiar with nakshatras, um, there are about 27 of them, and each one has a different energy associated with them. And so each night the moon passes through a different one, and after 27 nights you get a lunar month. Okay. So Aslesha is symbolized by a snake. Okay. So the energy associated with Aslesha is really about like attention. Sometimes it's positive attention, sometimes a negative attention, but just attention of some kind of like a snake does typically. Some people really love snakes, but if you're like myself, like you see a snake, you kind of freeze. You walk the other way. It gets your attention, that sort of thing. And I've mentioned that people that I've seen pretty often who have important placements in Aslesha tend to be people who get a lot of attention, like actresses and models and things like that. Okay. So, and the moon, since it's an emotional planet, it seems like there's some sort of like emotional attention seeking going on here, or something that's catching your emotional attention. Okay. That's actually very strong. Okay. That has to do with, development of self. Okay. So sometimes I think of Aslesha too as kind of like an alert nakshatra. Okay. So there's some sort of like emotional alert going on here. Okay. Now, because the moon is so strong, that will bring strength and resilience and emotional tendencies for this chart, or, again, if this is a person. Also, there might be some public attention here, and again, development of self and focus maybe on self-development. The other thing is that the first house is what we call a dharmasthana, so a house of duty. Okay, so the thing is that, what did I say? So if somebody could be into self-development because they're kind of self-absorbed, and that may be partially true here. But the thing is, if if the ruling planet for the whole chart, meaning the ruling planet for Cancer or Moon, is in its own sign in a dharmasthana, part of the self-development is like out of a sense of duty, to better the self, to perhaps provide for other people in a better way. Okay. So I don't think it would be entirely like sort of self-motivated, but like maybe selfish. Yeah. So the day lord of this chart is the sun, and the hora lord or our lord is the moon. So we're picking up more of this moon energy, but we're also picking up the sun energy, and the sun is directly opposite the moon. Okay. Literally 18 degrees 50 minutes here. The sun represents leadership, especially like someone in the position of high authority, like a president or a king, that sort of thing. Okay. And so, what's interesting is that Sun is with Mars, Mercury, and Venus, 4 planets in the seventh house. The seventh house represents spouse, spouse-like partner, business partners, independent business, and path forward in life. But partnerships in general, especially like contracted partnerships, are related to the seventh house. So you already see this tension or dynamic between moon and sun. Excuse me. And again, from the perspective of partnerships. Okay. So part of the self-development is probably related to, especially leadership of relationships. Okay. Um, and the thing too is that when we see this kind of alignment, like if we were looking at this chart, not for just a general kind of overview, but if we were specifically looking at this chart in terms of relationship dynamics, the fact that you have 4 of these planets, Sun, Mars, Mercury, and Venus, directly opposite the moon, means that this moon person or moon event or, thing, person, place, or thing is really almost compelled to interact with a lot of different people. Okay, Sun, Mars, Mercury, and Venus. So Sun, again, is a leadership planet, president, king. Mars is another leadership planet, usually more of like a CEO type, somebody who's like more involved in the nitty-gritty details of running something. So Sun and Mars together, when you get that combination, you often get like a leadership management administrative type person, okay? And then we have Mercury here. Mercury is related to the analytical mind, logical mind, planning, that sort of thing. So that would shore up this idea of like an administrative type, like Sun, Mars, Mercury. Okay. And then we have Venus here. Venus is the creativity planet, social grace planet, diplomacy planet. So there's some sort of like maybe somebody who's head of like marketing and design, who's if we're taking the Sun, Mars, Mercury, Venus all together as like one person. Okay, but if we take them separately, this moon person is going to be interacting quite intensely and directly with a lot of different people. Okay. Now, the thing is, Sun is there, and Mars and Mercury, Venus, but Mars, Mercury, and Venus are all combust, meaning they're so close to the Sun you can't see them in the sky if you try to look and see them with your eyes, okay? So when you have a combust planet, you don't see the external manifestations of someone or something, that kind of thing, okay? But internally, those qualities are more developed. So Mars is an innovative planet, action planet, rebellious planet. Mercury's a planner, a thinker, detail-oriented. Venus is creative and, love and romance. So again, of these 4 planets in the 7th house of, again, relationships, the only one you can see is the Sun. So again, if you take all these planets together as like one person, this is somebody who's like a leader, but you probably don't really see, they probably have a poker face where you don't really see the inner workings of, what they're thinking or feeling, that kind of thing. Okay. This could also be, again, like a head of like a marketing department or that sort of thing. But the thing is, if you take these planets separately, Sun also represents father, Mars represents siblings, Mercury represents friends, Venus represents like a loved one, especially like a spouse-like partner. This is somebody who has to interact a lot with a lot of people they don't see, but directly. So you could almost see this as like an influencer type, especially because Moon represents public and Aslesha attention. So getting attention to the public potentially. Okay. But it's going to be pretty intense here and very emotional because Moon is an emotional planet and Venus is an emotional planet as well. And then also Moon and Mercury are the 2 mind planets. There's a lot of mental, emotional kind of energy expenditure, for this chart or person related to dealing with people, interacting with people, you know. And the thing is, a lot of this you can't see. The other possibility here is maybe it could be that, there are literally people you can't see, like maybe you interact with people through the internet or on Zoom or something like that. But also, since we have the moon here, and that's about the mind, and Mercury's about the mind, and moon is also about imagination, this could also potentially be, thinking about people internally, reminiscing, considering people internally, like either through meditation or dreams or that sort of thing. And contemplating the ways in which somebody is relating to other people, especially in terms of self-development. Like, how are we relating? How is this person relating to other people in positive or negative ways? And again, there's probably a lot of emotion here. Sun and Mars are 2 fire planets, so that's going to be like anger, irritation, or maybe even frustration potentially. Mercury is more of the, thinking, logical, analytical mind, so they're processing all this. But Venus is also like the emotional planet here with the moon. So a lot of thinking, but like internally, a lot of internal dynamics going on that aren't present on the surface. But there might be this sort of like, with all this pressure building up in the 7th house, it looks like this might be a moment of clarity. All of a sudden, there's like an emotional kind of, strong feeling or maybe even outburst or something like that, where it's just like, the tension is built up and finally being like expressed and revealed on the surface of how somebody truly feels, especially regarding relationships and partnerships. Okay. And maybe their frustration about it, that sort of thing. So, what else is going on here? So again, this 4 planets in the 7th house, we call that a pravraja yoga in Vedic astrology. It's pretty similar to the definition of stellium in Western astrology. So, again, we have Sun, just to get into the details of this pravraja yoga. So Sun is there. Mars is quite strong. Mars is exalted. So Mars is going to be kind of the dominant planet, I would say, either Sun or Mars, either one. Again, we've got 2 action planets, 2 fiery planets, 2 leadership planets here. So it's either Sun because it's making these other 3 combust, or it's Mars, because Mars is the strongest planet in the house. And also, let me just double check on that. Mercury and Venus are in a nakshatra called Dhanishta. Check that out in my head. So Dhanishta, that nakshatra, the symbol of that is a drum. So it's all about like rhythm and sometimes music too, especially because we have Mercury and Venus there. There can be like rhythm and music associated with this. So especially if this is somebody's meditation or daydream or night dream or whatever, this might be about romance, or the rhythm of relationships and that sort of thing. Okay. But Mercury and Venus are in that Dhanishta nakshatra. The star of Dhanishta is Mars. So especially Mercury and Venus are dominated by Mars, both externally by Mars there and then by the star of Mars through its nakshatra. So again, Mars is a innovative planet, rebellious planet, initiator planet. So there's some new start going on here, but deeply internal. Both for the 7th house person of partner, who is this looks like some sort of authority administrative type, and then also for the moon person, who's more of the imaginative, emotional type. They're both, because again, these 4 planets, they're reciprocal. Moon is aspecting all these 4 planets in the 7th house, and all these planets in the 7th house are reciprocating their energy on the moon. So there's a lot going on here internally for both people. Okay. And let's see. Let me just see someone. The other thing is Mars is also bhavat bhavam. So Moon is bhavat bhavam because the first house has gone to the first lord has gone to the first house. Mars is also bhavat bhavam because it's the 10th lord gone to the 10th house, 10 houses away. So yeah, so that means that the 10th house is related to daily activity. So it's like one initiating, activity every day, that's like, kind of supporting this internal churn that's going on here. Okay. And since we have Mercury and Venus in this Dhanishta, kind of drumbeat, music, rhythm energy, Sun and Mars are in a nakshatra called Shravana, which is all about oral history, okay, and storytelling. So again, especially if both of these people are involved in getting emotional attention for stories like, set to rhythm, like, you might even think of like poetry or something like here, or like, again, if this is advertising, like, jingles, like the musical jingles for ads and stuff like that, or maybe the storytelling, in ads, maybe if it's not literally music, it's like the rhythm and cadence of the words and verbiage and stuff that they use, okay? So it's like one action after another related to this. Again, the 10th house also relates to work and day-to-day, like 9 to 5 activity. So again, especially both of these people look like they're involved in that sort of genre of work, but maybe in different capacities, okay? And then what else do we have here? We also have a bhavam Venus, yeah, Venus, right? Yeah, Venus, because Venus is the 4th house lord, and the 4th house lord's gone 4 houses away. The 4th house relates to happiness and home and, lineage and that sort of thing. So again, with this, a strong initiator energy coming from Mars, it's and Sun, I think they're sort of co-dominant, but I would say Mars a little bit more. because in the nakshatra placement, there's this initiation to internally, tell a story, write a story that's going to shift the dynamics. Daily activity going towards shifting the dynamics of like the lineage here, okay, the past here, and happiness here. So this is kind of like resetting an internal story, even if this isn't like professional, like setting the tone and telling the story through advertisements or ads or brand. This could be like a brand marketer type person too. Um, this is like, if this is like more on a personal level, this is somebody who's going deep within, reassessing relationships and coming back with like retelling, creating a different storyline for the history of their relationships, like maybe through something like journaling or something like that. The day-to-day activity, like maybe they're doing meditations or they're doing like self-talk or they're doing whatever, that sort of thing, because there's clearly problems with the relationships. As much as this person is like emotional and that sort of thing, it seems like the emotional alert is like, again, this tension coming to the surface and like grabbing somebody's attention, like something needs to be done here because the story keeps kind of repeating itself. So how do we create a different story to set us on a better track? Because the seventh house is also a path forward in life. Okay. And the reason why I'm saying there's trouble with the relationships, well, there's two obvious ones. So one, Venus is in the seventh house. That's Karka, bhava, nashaya, Venus. So it sounds pretty good because Venus represents spouse and love and romance and that kind of thing. But it's in the seventh house, which sounds good because that's the house of spouse and spouse like partnerships. But it's almost like there's too much energy there. So usually that means that there's trouble with relationships, especially with the spouse. Okay, so that's one indication. The other indication is Mars is in the seventh house, and that's a Manglik yoga combination that's indicates that there's like trouble with relationships, but for different reasons. Like Mars is like a fighting planet, a rebellious planet. So when you have these two fire planets, Sun and Mars, especially, and Mars in the seventh house, this is going to create potentially a lot of fighting. There's a lot of creativity here, but a lot of fighting as well in terms of partnerships, professional, personal, or whatever. So there's problems with the other thing is that Mercury and Venus have just gotten on planetary war. So again, when planets are in war, they end up kind of beating each other up and destabilizing each other and the houses that they represent. So again, Mercury represents what is it here? The third house of actions or nonverbal communication, and the 12th house of losses and expenditures. So that's problematic. So Mercury is actually a temporal malefic in this chart, and because it's the lord of two negative houses, so it's bringing negative energy to the seventh house. So that's actually a third indication of problems with relationships. And then Venus is the lord of the seventh house of home and lineage. So that probably means that, like, again, it wasn't necessarily the happiest home or upbringing that somebody went through. And maybe, the whole family has problems with relationships, that kind of thing. And then Venus is also the lord of the 11th house of clubs, groups, and society, friendships, and older siblings as well. So, there's a lot of going on here, okay, related to relationships, and trouble with relationships. So, again, this might be an outburst, maybe some competition as well, because Sun and Mars being fiery planets, that might be part of the arguments here, is that they're actually competing with each other rather than working together. Okay, because you have two fire planets, and Moon is emotional, Venus is emotional, Mercury's logical, but the strongest planets are this dynamic of this really strong Moon, and then I would say Sun and Mars. Mercury and Venus are again kind of or not kind of are the weaker planets here because they both just came out of war and they're both combust. So even though they're potentially benefic planets, they're just not as influential here. So this could be like, things coming to a head, like maybe there's some outburst or, again, losing decorum. Because, again, especially the seventh house person seems like they're pretty reserved or, again, not showing what they're thinking and feeling. Definitely trouble with relationships. And then the other thing is by February 5th, so just a few days after this, Venus and Mercury are moving into the 8th house here. So then you're really going to be feeling this, like, this might be just like the beginning of like some real strong arguments and stuff like this, just like a rumbling under the surface right now that might start to be showing itself. But once Mercury and Venus move out of here, then you just have Sun and Mars, the two fire planets, leadership planets, but also fighting planets involved here. And around that time, they're going to be moving from Shravana, which is more of like a cultivated, arts type of energy, to Danishta. So Danishta is symbolized by a drum, which can be things like music and rhythm, but it can also be like a drum beat, like the soldiers marching type of thing. And these are two, fire planets. So it could be, again, switching to that kind of energy where this is things are going to get more aggressive and, more arguments happening here. The other thing about, since we're talking about relationships so much here, it's pretty obvious, that's kind of the focus here, is that the relationship styles of these two people is very different. So I already mentioned, like, this moon person is going to have a lot of direct, even if they're not seeing people in front of them, like they're seeing people on the screen or they're dealing with people on the internet or whatever, there's going to be a lot of direct interaction that this moon person has and probably is overwhelmed by it, frankly. Now, the 7th house person, the lord of the 7th house is Saturn, which is off to the side. Okay, so the moon is what we would say in a 1-7 relationship, which again is this, intense direct contact, almost like compulsive contact with people, and a lot of people here, family members, but again, generally speaking, okay, which is going to be a lot for the moon person. But the 7th house person, they're off to the side here. So that's another indication that, like, they're not revealing themselves quite so much, maybe even physically. And then we call this like a 3-11 relationship dynamic. So this is going to be like more of like a secret supporters. Sometimes you hear that, terminology. Like, there's support here, but in ways that you don't like fully see or understand. Like, this might be some kind of alliance that's not like really obvious to anyone or, on the surface, but like, people talking behind the scenes and supporting people behind the scenes, like getting things done behind the scenes. Whereas this moon person is like all about like upfront in your face. And the other thing is this moon person and all these other people is that they're like opposites of each other, literally in the chart. But like, this is like a opposites attract type of energy here. But again, the moon person and then the Saturn 7th house person have very different styles of interacting, which can add more tension to all this. So again, we have the direct emotional person, Moon, and then indirect, again, also practical person, Saturn, because Saturn's a tangible sign, and then the constellation of the 7th house of Capricorn, which is a movable earth sign. It's all about practical building stuff. So again, it looks like we have some sort of management person here, administration person here, who's all about building things, especially usually they're like wealth, material oriented, but doing it in like a quiet, like indirect way. Okay, so that's just the start. Okay, so let's see what else. So on this chart, we got some new information. So the dasha period, that's the planetary period. The dasha period indicates the planets that are kind of more influential or active at a given time. So we're starting off with Mercury K2 Mars, and then we're moving to Mercury K2 Rahu on 20th of February. So, a good 3 weeks here. So what we want to do is keep our eyes, a little bit more focused on Mercury and Mars, which we've been talking about in the 7th house. And then K2, and to pick that up. So K2 is in the 2nd house here. 2nd house is related to family, inner circle, assets, speech, and K2 tends to be like an erratic planet, kind of like Mars, but even more kind of erratic and unusual, kind of separatist, like kind of love them or leave them kind of energy sometimes with K2. So, and the thing is, Mars is aspecting K2 from the 7th house. So that means that this, two planets representing erratic actions and, rebelliousness are in the 2nd house of family, inner circle, asset, speech. So this might be, saying, some erratic things with inner circle, or some, strange, unusual actions being taken within or by the family, that kind of thing. Okay. And then switching to Mercury, Ketu, Rahu. So Mercury is on the 1-7 axis here. So Mercury is like usually words or thoughts or plans. Since Mercury's combust, it's probably more internal dialogue and planning and thinking and stuff like that. So there's a lot of thinking going on here. And then we're switching to Mercury, Ketu, Rahu. So then we're going to be running Ketu, Rahu. So the thing is, again, remember, we're moving into eclipse season here. Okay. So that's going to bring, just being an eclipse season, is going to bring unusual, unexpected energy. And then we're running both nodes of the moon. So things might go a little haywire here, but Rahu is in the 8th house here of deep psychology, which would give this person an unusual alternative kind of mindset, but also like ambition here towards 8th house matters, which is like, research, contemplation, other people's money, sort of thing. And Rahu is in nakshatra called Shatabisha, which is translated as 100 healers. So this could be, contemplating things that are difficult to heal, which again, we've sort of been talking about mostly in the context of relationships here. Okay. So let's see. The other thing, specifically on February 5th, okay, because you can see Mars is in 13 degrees, 13 minutes at this moment in time on the 1st, and KT's at 16 degrees, 15 minutes. On February 5th, Mars is going to catch up and be in the exact degree as K2. Okay. Usually when Mars and K2 get together like that, it creates an explosive energy. So again, it looks like there's some tension building up, some things being said, inner turmoil going on. And now things might really, like, besides the emotional alert, where it's kind of like you can feel the tension building, but maybe it hasn't really like blown out yet. It might kind of blow out around February 5th, Yeah, so the other thing is Mars and K2 can bring accidents, injuries, infections. So that's a possibility as well. The 2nd house, I mentioned, family, inner circle, speech, also face and neck. So there might be some like injury to the face or neck. The other thing is the 2nd house is all about like nutrition and eating as well. So with Mars and Ketu there, this could be like some really disordered eating going on. Not necessarily pathologically, but like just not having your 3 set meals a day, or eating a lot of processed, junk food and stuff like that, emotional eating, uncontrollable erratic eating, could be part of this. And then the other thing is that, I mentioned Mercury and Venus are going to move out of there, which is bringing some, even though it's weak, benefic energy here. But Mars and Sun and Mars are going to move into Danashta. So Mars is going to be exalted by constellation in Capricorn. And then it's going to be Swa by star, because Mars is a star of Danashta. And then you might really get like some kind of aggressive action here. Upset, anger, conflict, that sort of thing. Once Mercury and Venus move out and Sun and Mars, again, Mars is going to click off K2 here, and then and then the Sun and Mars are going to move into Danashta. So looks like a little bit more, upsets coming here. But again, sometimes this is like a emotional release as well. This could be like an emotional release. Once the conflict arises, and hopefully, if the attitude is like, okay, well, what can we learn from this, and learn and build better and move forward in a better way. But it might seem a lot more chaotic. The process itself, might be a bit chaotic and upsetting. So. All right, so the other thing about K2, now I have in here arrows from K2, okay, going from the 2nd house to the 6th and the 2nd house to the 10th, and they're dotted here because this isn't happening exactly on February 1st, but it's coming. Okay, so this is the direction things are moving in. Because once Sun will eventually move into Aquarius in the 8th house here on February 12th. Okay. Once Sun moves into Aquarius on February 12th, we're going to get these 5-9 aspects from K2. So this erratic, explosive, separatist energy from K2 is going to be part of the 6th house of acute problems, enemies, as well as routines, and then also in the 10th house of day-to-day work and reputation. Okay, so things are, like I said, we're going to eclipse season. Sun and Mars moving into a star of Mars and with an exalted Mars. K2 and Mars tipping off here in the same degree. You can see, you see what I mean. Like, there's a lot that's going to be coming here. So yeah, things are going to get more chaotic, and again, 5-9 aspect from K2 is going to last for about a month, while Sun is in Aquarius. Once Sun moves into Pisces, K2 will calm down again in terms of its aspects. That'll be through March 14th, okay? But there can be a lot of erratic changes going on with enemies, routine, daily work because the K2 aspects here. Okay. Once Sun moves into Aquarius, it will be aspecting its own sign in the second. Well, so that will bring some strength to the second house, protect some things in the second house, like more inanimate things. That also means when Sun moves into Aquarius, we're going to have Mars aspecting the second house and Sun aspecting the second house. So there's going to be even more firepower in a fixed fire sign with K2 in the second house. I mean, that's a lot of fire. Like, it might literally be fire, but in terms of people, since we're talking about family, fighting, arguments, people slamming doors, walking out, maybe possibly violence as well. I mean, frankly, unfortunately, could go that way. So we're going to have some protection, but this is also potentially going to happen on a fairly high level because the Leo, which is the constellation of the second house, is all about like higher level, like echelon of society or businesses or whatever going on there. So, yeah, let's see. The other thing is that even though this 7th house person, right, the Capricorn person with Sun obvious, but Mars, Mercury, Venus combo, so you can't really see, what they're thinking and feeling. Sun at the current moment on February 1st are in Shravana, and the star of Shravana is the moon. So, again, the Sun and Mars, this aggression or whatever, is not only quite emotional because Venus is there in war, recently out of war, and then you got this strong swa moon on it, but Sun and Mars are, for at least a few more days, going to be in a star of Mars, star of Moon. So they may not be showing it, but there's actually a lot rumbling under the surface again for this 7th house person. Mars will move out of Capricorn 23rd of February, so that might be a time to kind of cool off all this going on here. But Mars will still be aspecting the second house, so that's that part, the second house, kind of blow up will be ongoing, more ongoing. Again, the 7th house stuff should cool down, in about 3 weeks here on the 23rd of February. But then the thing is, this pravraja yoga, this conglomeration of 4 planets, that's highlighting the 7th house of relationships, independent business path forward. Those are all going to move into the 8th house of deep psychology. Long chronic problems, such as death, such as chronic disease, such as bankruptcy, with Rahu. And that's where the eclipses are going to be happening on this 2-8 axis here for the Cancer rising people. Okay. So let's see. Yeah. So again, there are a lot of contemplation of these relationships going on. It may not be direct action and fire like it is right now in the first. But then there's going to be, and again, this feeds into this notion of like rewriting history. Like, it's almost like, why do I keep getting into these, like, conflicts with people and, direct fighting with people and that sort of thing, and contemplating that. And again, with the eclipses, that could be like a sudden insight that comes that helps to move oneself away from the old story that keeps repeating itself. So again, the 17th February, solar eclipse in Aquarius, March 3rd, lunar eclipse in Leo. Again, more unusual shakeups for a good month here, it looks like. In addition, we know that the Chitra grahas or planets of vulnerability in these chart. Well, this is interesting. So Jupiter by 2, twice over, and then Sun twice over. Okay. So what's interesting to me in that case is that Jupiter is the lord of the ninth house, which is related to father and authority. Jupiter also, as a planet itself, as a bhava, as a karaka, symbolizes guru, and the ninth house also symbolizes guru, a teacher. And then Sun is a Chidragraha, so Sun relates to authority, and that's also the ninth house, which it's the lord of, which Jupiter's the lord of. And Sun also represents father. So there can be, especially a lot of problems with father chronically for a chart like this, but as a transit chart, temporarily, because we have Saturn and the planet of delays and obstacles in the ninth house related to father, authority, guru, also a spiritual community, satsang. And the lord of the ninth house has gone to the 12th. So losses and expenditures here. Yeah. And the thing is, again, the Saturn is the lord of the 7th house. So again, with all these relationships, it's like the energy from all this mess with the relationship in the 7th house is going to the ninth, and then getting drained off into the 12th. And again, Chidragraha has planets of vulnerability. They indicate sticking points or somebody's sensitive spots. So again, it looks like, especially for this type of person, they're not real good with like father figures and authority figures and that sort of thing. And especially with Sun being in the 7th house here, there can be this. That might also be part of the long history here. Is not being great with authority figures and father figures, and that's what creates part of this ongoing emotional tumult. And how do we change the story here? So the yogi in this chart, and these are now I'm talking about planets of wealth. The yogi in this chart is Rahu. So there's value here, in going into this 8th house, and this 8th house, so deep psychology, research, maybe other people's money. So there might be some inheritance involved here. And then the Avi yogi is Ketu, so lack of wealth related to, second house matters. But Ketu is kind of a mixed bag because Ketu indicates gains being in the second house, but there's also, but not necessarily material gains, I would say. Uh, Maybe this is like speaking a foreign language, or maybe letting go of, maybe the gains are by letting go of material things, with this placement of K2. And the duplicate yogi is the sun. So again, it looks like part of what's not only a relationships, part of the issue here, but also the sun will take us again back to relationships here and father, and also it's the lord of the second house. So again, there's a lot going on related to the second house of family, inner circle, assets. Okay, what else we have? So we also, besides this massive pravraja yoga in the 7th house, we have a bunch of other yogas. So if you're not familiar, yogas are combinations. That's all it really means. Usually planets, though. So, and what the yogas do is they give additional meaning or interpretation to a chart, or extra effects, meta effects that are sort of above, the normal or typical sort of like analysis of planets and houses and constellations, things like that. So there's a bunch of yogas in this chart, which is not surprising given that we have so many planets on the 1-7 axis. So we have a Richika yoga. That's Mars exalted in the 7th house. That's a Panchamahapurush yoga that gives strength, power. And we have the pravraja yoga. The pravraja yoga has 4 planets in the 7th house, gives a life focus. So again, focus on relationships and We also have a Chandra Mangala yoga. That's the relative placements of Moon and Mars. That's property and wealth. So again, part of this conflict is about property and wealth. With the Mangalic yoga I mentioned, that's Mars in the 7th house. That's problems with relationships, usually arguments. Being rebellious, rather than cooperative. We have a Buddha Ditya yoga here. That's a combination for intelligence with Sun and Mercury. We have lunar yoga here. Jupiter, even though it's in the 12th house, it is supporting Moon to some degree. So there's probably this Moon person is also probably quite eloquent. We have a Parvata yoga as well. This really strong Moon gives a leadership energy, more of like an emotional, like public leadership. Again, like an influencer type energy here. Parvata gives like a leader of leaders type of energy. So all this together: strength, power, focus, wealth, property, trouble with relationships, intelligence, leadership. So again, the partners here, 7th house people, very different from the native. There's a lot of compulsive interactions between the moon person and all these other people, or maybe one person in the 7th house. The other thing is that this moon person, I mentioned there's probably some problems with father or guru here. They may not feel very supported because of the relative placements of Jupiter and Moon. So Jupiter, again, being the lord of the 9th house of, again, father, guru, authority, is in what we consider a 212 position from the Moon. So that can indicate somebody who doesn't feel supported by, house related to Jupiter or that sort of thing. So, yeah, and again, deep contemplation about long-standing relationship troubles going on here. Okay, so if we look at some of the other houses, the 3rd house here, the 3rd house lord is combust, recently out of war, Mercury and Danishta, aspected by Saturn and Uttar Bhadrapada. Uttar Bhadrapada is symbolized by the back legs of a funeral pyre, so there's a lot of destruction, but it's kind of like starting to kind of pull things back together, after destruction. So again, that kind of feeds into this notion of sorting through the mess, like sorting through the difficulties. And especially we have in the 3rd house here, Virgo, which is a dual earth sign, and Mercury, can symbolize writing, and the 3rd house can symbolize writing, and Saturn is, this can be like writing, this can be like, writing that ends things, like a resignation letter potentially, or creating space with people. But this can also be like a sorting through the difficulties. Like I was saying, like a journaling process or something like that, like trying to get to the root of the problem. Um, but there can be physical barriers and delays to communication, literally. Like maybe somebody lost their phone, or maybe there's a storm and the power went out or something like that. But what I'm saying here is like editing words and writing and thoughts and stuff like that. There can also, medically, there can also be like difficulty with arm or shoulder, and also siblings and neighbors from this 3rd house. The fourth house lord is a combust, war, recently in war, Venus and Danishta, aspected by retrograde Jupiter and Punarvasu. So Punarvasu is symbolized by a quiver of arrows, so going back and forth. So Jupiter is going back and forth, related to its 4th house of home, related to happiness, also education. So because Jupiter and Venus are related to the 4th house here, this again is probably somebody who studied literature, arts, in the arts, that kind of thing. And probably somebody who enjoys listening to music. The mom is probably a homebody or a homemaker. And again, studies related to marketing, literature, arts, that sort of thing. The fifth house lord is an exalted Mars in Shravana. So this is like, advising. The 5th house is about advising. And so again, the advice is going into the 7th house of, independent partners, writing stories, creating stories, maybe set to music, representing partners, like, again, brand development or brand storytelling, that's the kind of thing. Then the 6th and 7th houses here. So the 6th house lord is a retrograde Jupiter aspecting its own house. Also aspect of Saturn, Uttarabhadrapada, and soon there's going to be an aspect of Ketu, really stirring things up. Ketu's in a nakshatra called Purva Falguni, excuse me, which is symbolized by either a marital bed or a hammock. So, like, potentially luxury, but again, Ketu's like about like almost like turning your back to that. And the 6th house is related to routine, enemies, and so there's looks like there's going to be disruption to routines. Also, I would say like an organizational enemy here, because Jupiter, which is lord of the 6th house, is gone to the 12th of losses and expenditures, and this Jupiter is also picking up the energy of enterprise and authority, maybe government, father, guru, in the 9th house here. So it's not just like a single person. It looks like there's like a organizational conflict here, and then losses through boss and authority. Then the 7th house, I've been talking about that a long time. So Saturn is the lord, then we have Sun there, Mercury, Venus, aspected by the moon, Mars as well. I didn't write that in there, but Mars, of course. So again, a practical 7th house person, practical building-oriented manager type, poker face. Maybe there might be many people behind the scenes involved. Rewriting internal relationship story. So this rewriting the story is not just, I think, superficial. Even if it's marketing or something like that. Sometimes we see marketing as more superficial and maybe gimmicky, but this is really coming from a deep place here. So, and again, a lot of turning emotions finally being expressed, coming to the surface. But again, creating this new life rhythm, and maybe even again, you might literally be having like dreams or something coming through in meditations, like deep within this contemplation. So then 8th, 9th, and 10th houses. 8th house lord is Saturn. Rahu's there, aspected by retrograde Jupiter. So alternative mindset, especially related to authority. And again, the thing is that since Saturn is the lord of the 8th house here, Saturn was recently in Purva Bhadrapada, which was more destructive than Uttar Bhadrapada. So that was really causing probably a lot of havoc, and kind of like bringing the deep psychology back online for this Cancer rising person. Might sorry, and this kind of person also might have a deep interest in research, or especially or the occult. And again, there's this kind of cycling type of optimism. Like it's doesn't seem very steady here. Because Jupiter is again in this Punarvasu energy going back and forth with the arrows. Um, and so it's like sometimes this person can be more optimistic or not. And also the moon, is the fastest moving planet. The moon is only going to be in Cancer for like 2.5 days before it moves out of here, So, yeah, so again, this, it seems to be, more indications of mental emotional churning here. This could also be research funding. That's a possibility as well. Like this might be research grants that have lost or become unstable. Um, because again, the lord of the 8th house of other people's money is Saturn, which has just gotten out of, Purva Bhadrapada, still not hugely stable, but the lord of that Saturn has gone to the 12th houses, and Jupiter can represent education and teachers, and it can also represent like universities and finance. So yeah, could be losing faculty, for example, because of budget cuts, that kind of thing. Then the 10th house here, the 10th house lord is a combust, exalted Mars and Travana, and soon K2 is going to be there as well. So there's going to be a lot of unusual, wild activity and strong activity, maybe even compulsive activity going on, once Sun moves into Aquarius in the 12th house, or in the 11th, sorry, Sun moves into Aquarius in the 8th house, and then that means K2 is going to be aspecting the 10th here. So this is doing things in a whole new way. And the Aries is very like pioneering because it's like first, constellation. So again, creating a very new story, but I think one that's much more raw than and authentic and realistic than maybe what was a bit kind of covered over or sugar coated a little bit in the past, or not so. Again, not because it looks like in the past there have been relationships that haven't been fully expressive of their thoughts and feelings. And Mars and K2, it's like, there's no there's no filter here. This is like, just in your face. But again, maybe like a refreshing kind of uh, rawness, or yeah, going on. But again, it can be compulsive as well. The other thing is there can be a lot of disruptions here, but probably in a better way. At least there's some protection because Mars is aspecting its own house in the 10th here. So yeah, but again, this seems to be more activity, new, unusual activity that's supporting what's going on in the 7th house of relationships. Okay, then the 11th and 12th houses. The 11th house lord is a combust, recently wore Venus and Danishta, so new rhythm with friends and coworkers, maybe online, because Venus is combust, and then the 12th house lord, combust, wore Mercury and Danishta, retrograde Jupiter, generating a new beneficial mental cycle. So again, this is not as superficial as it might seem. This is actually quite deep in terms of when you tell yourself a new story. So this is what I was kind of thinking of once I was getting towards the end of the chart here. It reminded me of some of the training I've had where we were talking about the concept of emptiness, which is a concept that's often brought up in like the yoga world and Zen and Buddhism worlds. The concept of emptiness, where it's like, what stories, like, are you conscious of the stories you tell yourself? Like the example I use a lot, or used to use more, was like the example of a cell phone, right? So if you hold up a cell phone and you ask people, what is this? And they'll say like, oh, it's a noisemaker, or oh, it's a communication device, or oh, it's an interruption, or whatever their association with. But the thing is like, the phone itself is empty in terms of meaning. We add meaning to things. Okay. If you show that same cell phone to like a really big dog, maybe the really big dog thinks it's a chew toy and just chews it to pieces. It doesn't care if you communicate with it or it's an interruption or whatever. It's like fun, to just destroy it. So again, like, it's a relative truth in terms of the meaning we, project onto things. Yeah. And so, especially like for somebody like this who seems to have had a lot of very intense and also problematic relationships in their life, maybe they've told themselves stories about them. So they've created meaning where it was actually potentially empty. Like maybe this person says, oh, I'm no good at relationships, or things never work out for me, or whatever, when it was just maybe a certain, planetary period, or a certain, one person dynamic, or maybe a family dynamic, but it doesn't mean that everybody in every relationship is going to be like that. But if you tell yourself that, it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So that also, like, there's slightly adjacent training that's similar, is like there's a world of reality, like what actually happens, and then again the world of meaning. So like one exercise I've done with some of my younger both young, actually it works pretty well with kids, but adults as well. Like I remember one kid came into my office, early teenager, I believe, or new in high school, maybe freshman, sophomore, and was giving his mom a hard time because he wasn't studying. And so he comes in, she wants help. I don't know why she came to a medical office for that, but I was like, okay, I'll talk to this kid, see what I can do. So, anyway, so the kid's whole attitude was like, oh, well, yeah, I left my books behind in my locker, so I couldn't study, and this and that. It was just one excuse after another. And so I'm listening to this kid for a while. I was like, okay, that's cool. Okay. And then I said, okay, so tell me the exact same story, talking about storytelling. Tell me the exact same story, but every sentence you have to start with I chose. or I choose. Okay, either one. So it's like, I chose to leave my books in my locker. I chose, not to have an extra copy of the book at home. I chose, not to go back to school to get my books if I remembered that I'd forgotten them. I chose to whatever. And it was kind of funny because, like, even within that moment of telling the same story, but in a different way, and you can try this yourself. I mean, that's why I give it to people because I've done it myself. It's like you start to see where you actually had more choice. Like you're not just like a victim, to the world or the universe or whatever, or your parents or your teachers or whoever, your boss, is that you do actually have more choice than you realize. And so when you realize you have more choice, you also realize you have more choices how you respond to things and how you think about things. And you can put a more positive spin on things rather than creating this sort of doom and gloom attitude about certain people or relationships or experiences or even yourself. Yeah. So I think those concepts go together, the concept of emptiness and then again, world of reality versus world of meaning in terms of like the stories we tell ourselves and how they affect our openness or not, being in different circumstances, situations, relationships. I just want to make sure I finished everything on the slide. So yeah, the 12th house, the combust war, Mercury, retrograde. So again, generating new beneficial mental cycle to overcome acute issues. But again, trouble with enterprise, authority, enemies, children, because of this Jupiter going on 12th house. But I would also say forgiveness here. Jupiter is a very charitable planet, and the 12th house, even though we usually talk about it like losses and expenditures, there can be beneficial losses and expenditures like charity, giving to charity financially, or this could be like prayers and things like this. So, maybe again, doing your charitable, positive karmic work and activities is going to generate the kind of karma that's needed to really turn this whole internal mental story cycle around. Yeah, because again, this is Vedic astrology, right? So the basis of all of this is karma, and karma is just action. And again, that's also empty. Like there can be actions that create more positive karma, usually more desirable results, or more negative karma, more negative results. Or again, usually the more negatively you act, that'll kind of create this negative loop in terms of karma. And so negative actions may potentially create more negative actions, or the other way, more positive actions will create more positive actions. So kind of trying to shift the cycle there. So yeah, I mean, yeah. So there you go. Okay, so now I just have a few slides here. So these are some of the subzodiacs, amshas, subdivisional charts. Uh, these are all basically these are charts derived from the main chart. If you slice and dice the main chart into smaller pieces, you can get these charts. And these charts are mostly used for timing. So I have listed at the top here the dasha period. Remember, we started in Mercury, K2, Mars, and that shifting to Mercury, K2, Rahu, February 20th. But I specifically pulled out the amshas that are related to relationships and assets, money, and work, because that seemed like the most, obvious, you know, uh, implications for this chart. So on this slide, we have the Navamsha for D9 for spouse and partnerships, which was a big deal, right, for the chart. And then the Saptamsha D7 for children. So what I did here was I circled the planets in the chart period because that's what we're looking at here. We're doing a first class at like, are these planets positively placed, and then are they, well conditioned and all this sort of thing. So all right, so in the D9 for spouse and partnerships, Rahu's not well placed, but it is Swa, so it is strong and it's in the third house. So that'll indicate like unusual change and endings going on once we shift to the Rahu subperiod. So again, what we're looking at, since Mercury and Ketu are the same, what we're really, to be more specific, what we're really looking for is like what's happening during the Mars subperiod, and then how is that shifting things in the Rahu subperiod. So you can see Mars is Swa in the 5th house here, okay? Which can mean like innovative counseling, but this could also mean like a lot of fighting with kids, especially because Jupiter is there, and Jupiter is creating Karka dasha by being in the 5th house, because Jupiter represents children, and the 5th house represents children. So there might be a lot of fighting, but there's good counseling here. And then Rahu, looks like there's going to be some unusual but positive changes going on once we shift. And then let's see, Rahu is aspected by Venus and Rahu. Oh, sorry, Venus and Saturn. Sorry. So again, there's ambition. Rahu's in the 3rd house of creativity. Venus is the planet of creativity. Rahu's ambition, and Saturn's like past and structure. So ambition, and unusual creative structures, and this could be like a revision of the past, which is what we've been talking about. Mercury Swa in the 10th house, so very strong Mercury. Again, it's in Virgo, so a dual earth sign, sorting through things, daily action, cleaning things up, getting details in order. Also writing, literally could be writing, tangible writing. Mars is Swa plus Jupiter, and so creativity, and because the 5th house is also creativity, and Jupiter is publishing, so this could be like creative new writing. So again, we're seeing the same thing. We also have in this subchart here Saraswati Yoga, which is Mercury, Venus, and Jupiter in positive houses, which indicates education and creativity, which again, if you're trying to dive deep and rewrite your internal story to create better results in your life, you need both education of self and creativity, right? And then K2 is in the 9th house here with Saturn. And Venus is here. So this could be, again, problems with 5th house matters. Father, guru, teacher, authority, religious or spiritual community. So there might be some endings or shifts here. Okay. Then the subtamsha D7 for children. Well, first of all, there are 5 planets, in the lugna here. Okay, Rahu, Moon, and then you get aspects from Mars, Jupiter, and Sun. So just the fact that you have 5 planets in the lugna, that means this subchart's important. Okay, Mars is not well placed. It's with an exalted Saturn. So this could be like old enemies, problems becoming chronic because the Lord of the 6th house has gone to the 8th, so acute problems becoming chronic. Also, Saturn is aspecting the 8th house, so acute problems becoming chronic. Mercury is aspecting the 3rd house of writing again. Then we have an exalted K2 with Jupiter, Sun, Moon in the 7th house. So imagination, so Moon and Jupiter, imagination, intuition, poetry, optimism, and leading Sun leadership, but with a twist, this K2. And then the top we have Rahu with an exalted. Rahu's debilitated, but it's Banga because we have it's with an exalted Moon. And then you have Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Jupiter, Moon. So in the top you have Rahu, Moon, Jupiter, Mars, Sun. Oh, I listed Mars twice. That's why. I was like, that's a lot of planets. In the lugna. So again, ambition towards this imagination, intuition, optimism, creative twisting stuff going on here. So again, this is the children chart. So especially whatever the native is doing here, okay, is learning in this process of creating a new internal story for themselves related to relationship. This is filtering down into the kids, the lives of the kids. So we're not only shifting personal karma and legacy, but generational personal, karma and legacy here. Now the spouse, again, there's strength here in the spouse chart, okay, for both the Mars and Rahu subperiods, but you can see in the D7, there's a big shift, for the whole category of children, okay? And on the next slide, let's see what we have here. Okay, so on this slide, we have more subzodiacs here. We have the Drake and a D3 for siblings, and the Jyotish a D12 for parents and grandparents. So, In the D3 for siblings, we have 3 planets in the lugna here. So again, this is another important chart. So again, the children's chart was important just because of how much energy was going in the lugna. The siblings one, and now you can also see in the D12, there's also 3 grahas and planets in the. So all the biological relationships our charts are important here. So again, like what I was saying, like those planets in the 7th house in the native chart, all the and the lineage, the 4th house, and all that, like whatever is being done differently here in terms of the storytelling or the process or the journaling or the whatever. This is changing for the whole family. Whatever this person is learning here and doing, and can influence, that Mars and Ketu, that upset that's going on in the 2nd house. This might be somebody who's finally just getting real with people, instead of like sugarcoating it. And the thing is, by getting real with people, you can actually get to the core of issues instead of just glossing over and like being passive aggressive or whatever it is, in the best form of the Mars K2, in the worst form, again, it can be very violent, destructive, and separatist and all this kind of stuff. So, but okay, so D3, 3 grahas on the top. So this is an important chart. Rahu's not well placed as in the 8th house. So changes and endings, also deep psychology going on here, contemplation when we move to the Rahu subperiod. Mercury is swa, so it's strong, with a Bunga Venus, and again, aspecting Saturn on the 5th house creativity house, and also the 11th house of groups. So sorting through old group relationships creatively, that's fitting the same vibe here. K2 is in the 2nd house, like the main chart, and Mars is aspecting here. So again, explosive action, inner circle, family. So this is the same as the native. So again, it looks like the native and the siblings are kind of on the same page, or experiencing the same thing, which is not surprising given that there's so much indication related to family in the main chart. So it's affecting everybody. Then the Dwadashamsa D12 for parents, grandparents. We have 3 grahas in the lugna, so it's an important chart. All the grahas are well placed here, but that doesn't mean it's all peachy keen. Moon is in the lugna here in the D12, so that means that there's issues with mom on some level. Also, the 1st house lord is debilitated in the 3rd house, and that's Saturn, which is pretty gnarly. And that Saturn aspects the 5th house of children. It aspects the 9th house of father and authority. It also aspects the 12th house of losses and expenditures. Also, since Moon and Sun are on the Rahu Ketu axis, that may mean that the parents are divorced. So what I'm saying here is that it looks like, again, parents have gone through some difficult relationships, and maybe the native again picked up that storytelling from the parents, directly or indirectly, or this could even be like family karma going on here. Maybe that's just some families are like that. Like some families, nobody gets divorced. Other families, everybody gets divorced. Like nobody can kind of keep a relationship together. That kind of thing. So also in this chart, Mercury and Mars are in parivartana. So that means, again, since we're in the Mercury period, and Mars, that's going to be, and we're looking at the 5th house here and the 10th house here. That's counseling, creativity, day-to-day work. So you're going to have basically a Mars, Mercury, Venus combination in the 10th house here. This is like, and it's in Scorpio, so deep emotional, creative narrative being written here, like a innovative narrative being written. And this chart also has a Saraswati yoga, so there's learning and creativity. So, so there's a lot of intensity in this, parents, grandparents chart. So again, the legacy, 4th house for the native. Again, we saw that there was a lot of maybe goodwill because you had the 2, right? Because it was a Libra, Venus owned house, and Jupiter is aspecting there. So there's goodwill, but in terms of implementation, in terms of expression, maybe lacking, right? Because Venus is combust and Jupiter is off in the 12th house, so But again, planets being run here, potentially very helpful. And Rahu here, so Mercury you can see is basically Swa, Mars is Swa, those are strong. K2 is okay, but Rahu is with a Swa dispositor landlord here. So Mercury, Rahu, Mars are all pretty strong. K2's a little, it's okay, but yeah, especially during the K2 Rahu period, again, there's going to be like strong interactions here between the parents, grandparents, and then their partnership. So again, this might be kind of like almost like what do they call it? Like managing up, instead of the parents and grandparents leading the way in terms of teaching the children. Maybe the native is teaching up in terms of like maybe the way that they've found that the parents or grandparents dealt with things, their own internal dialogue or relationships wasn't the greatest or most helpful for them, and so they start changing things, and maybe that again filters back to the parents and grandparents. So what else? So on this slide I have the D10, Dashamsha for career and reputation, Ekadamsha D11 for public support and income, and Chatratamsha D4 for assets. Because again, we have that we're running Mercury, KT, Mars, right? And KT, Mars are lining up in the second house, are already in the second house together, and are going to be lining up in the 10th house. We've got Mercury on the 1-7 axis in the native chart. So I would assume that, career. And also that Mars is bhavat bhavam, right? The 10th house lord is gone to now the 7th house. So I would assume, these things are affecting these houses. So in the D10, all grahas are well placed. Mercury is with a Swa dispositor Venus, and Mercury and Venus are aspecting the third house of creativity, and Mercury represents writing. So creative writing again. There's also another star, Swati Yoga again, education and creativity. We have a parivartana between Saturn and Jupiter, so an exchange of houses. So Saturn and Jupiter are going to be all over here. So and they're in the 4th house of lineage and the 5th house of advising and creativity. So unusual creative writing lineage going on here. Because Saturn, yeah, because in so this 4th house you have Saturn and Jupiter, and then the 5th house you have Mars, K2, Jupiter. So this is almost like spinning a story, like taking a negative lineage and like sending it on a new upward spiral. And that's their career, which is not surprising, because like I said, it looked like maybe this could be like a head of marketing or brand and brand development, that kind of thing. Let's see. So the 5th house, yeah, this Mars, KT, Saturn, Jupiter mix, rewriting past disturbances that could be affecting or involving children. Also, like the lack of grace. So, like this is like a hard luck story that's being rewritten here. Bringing some grace to a hard luck story. And then we have Rahu in the 11th house, Mars and Jupiter are aspecting here. Jupiter's exalted in this 11th house, though, because it's Cancer. So once the story's been rewritten, there's an ambition to share it with group through like public speaking, it looks like. Which could also, again, tie into this potential influencer vibe that's coming through the main chart. Then the Ekadamsha D11, public support and income, K2 and Rahu not well placed, but they're both exalted. So unusual changes and endings. And again, they're in the 3rd house of creativity and action. So doing things in a new way. Moon and Venus are in parivartana. So those are the 2 aesthetic arts planets. So that's all over the 11th. So again, public support and income through creativity and arts. And they're exchanging energy between the 2nd house of speaking and the 11th house of clubs and groups and society. So creative families, speaking groups, that's how, this person's making money, especially during this period here. And Venus is with, Mercury. Venus and Mercury are going to be in most of these charts together because they're almost in the same degree. They just moved out the same degree. So you're going to, again, get a lot of creative writing through all these subcharts even. Then when you have the chapter tamsha D4 for assets, Rahu's not well placed. It's in the 8th house of deep, contemplation again. We've seen that over and over again. Doing things in an alternative way, revamping the psychology that keeps happening. Mercury is with the Swa Venus aspected by Mars. So this is almost like that, what was in the previous one? Yeah, so Mars, again, initiating creative writing, and design. That's consistent through these charts. Ketu's in the 2nd house again. So this could be assets through technology, doing things in an unusual way. And then also I said prolific writing because there's a bhavat bhavam Saturn here. The 2nd house Lord has gone 2 houses away. This is going to be one speaking, gig after another, activity after another. And also Saturn is with a retrograde Jupiter, Swa retrograde. It's a lot of publishing of past and publishing of oral stories, strange oral stories. It used to be, you would pass it on like whatever grandmother to their kids or grandkids or whatever. And now maybe it's about digitizing and like blogging about these stories rather than just, orally telling it to people because that might get lost. So maybe putting these things in writing and then disseminating them online. Then Rahu, 8th Lord, and the 8th house Lord is Sun. And then we've got Moon in the 7th house. So we've got a Swa Moon with Sun in the 7th house. So this is kind of funny. It's almost like again, spinning things in the opposite way. And Mars is actually aspecting this. So you have Mars, Sun, Moon in the 7th house again. So again, leadership of mind, leadership of emotions, imagination. Also, Jupiter is aspecting there. So, an intuition as well, and a drive to do research and do a deep dive here to, again, restore and redirect relationships and storytelling, internal storytelling about that for better outcomes. Okay, so as always, thanks so much for stopping by, listening to one of my talks. All my teaching videos on the subject of Vedic Astrology are my concepts playlist. They can be found there. For famous birth charts, check out my birth charts archive list 2025 video. For individual birth chart readings, I do those and offer those. And I also do astrology classes. So for information about any of that stuff, email heartlightastra@yahoo.com. Also, I do have another YouTube channel on natural medicine where I discuss Ayurveda, traditional Indian medicine, as well as yoga, homeopathy, and naturopathic medicine. And the name of that channel is Nature Source Care, so that's out there too for you. So as always, I hope you found this talk helpful, useful, and interesting to you as you learn to navigate the energy cycles of your own life. All right, so until the next one, take good care. Namaste.